Society of America, Nashville chapter. I'm Ariel Ellis, diversity chair for our chapter, and welcome to our diversity chat. Our diversity chat for our chapter is an online discussion about corporate brands and communicating diversity and inclusion through issues and audiences. And we started this chat because we felt there was a need for all of our members, as well as public relations practitioners and communicators in our area throughout Middle Tennessee and Kentucky, et cetera, different areas that our chapter serves, to have a discussion about how do you communicate to different audiences from the aspect of diversity, and how do you communicate different issues from just thinking of diversity just as a thought, beyond race, beyond gender, beyond age and generation, location, et cetera, educational background. So how do we actually expand the diversity conversation and talk to some of our colleagues in the public relations industry specifically about ways that they're implementing diversity and using diversity and making it a huge platform for their audiences, as well as the issues within their organization. So our guest today is actually not new to our chapter, but she's returning. We tried to kick off our diversity chat late last fall in December. We had a few technical difficulties, so we welcomed our new guest back to kick off this new series for 2015. Today we have Michelle Smith from AT&T. She's the Senior PR Manager of Corporate Communication for U.S. Diversity at AT&T in Texas. She leads diversity corporate communication for AT&T, including 8 multicultural and emerging segments. She has over 20 years of experience and has led teams of dynamic public relations professionals for some of the world's largest agencies, as well as with her own boutique agency. And she's led them, of course, to some winning results, which we'll get a chance to actually talk about today. At AT&T, she's responsible for creating the vision for leading all integrated diversity programs, including military, disability, Gen Y, women, African American, Hispanic, Asian, and LGBT segments. She directs 5 agency teams for the Fortune 11 communication giant, and recently, last year, won a PRSA Anvil for Best Multi-Communication Program. Welcome our guest today.
It's so good to be here. Thank you, Ariel, and thank you all of you from the PRSA Nashville chapter for having me.
Michelle, why don't you just kind of jump in and let us know how you transition into your work at AT&T and what led you into a role as a PR practitioner who owned an agency and have worked on a variety of different campaigns and servicing a variety of different areas. What led you into this path?
Well, I'll start with the first question. I have been in agency PR roles for most of my PR life, if you will. And I thought it would be a good opportunity to transition into the corporate world when the opportunity presented itself. But before I started at AT&T, going back to the very beginning, right out of college, in fact, actually during college, I started a career in television news as an intern at the Dallas-Fort Worth bureaus of ABC and NBC for a bit, and then I settled at the CBS turned Fox affiliate, which is KDFW TV here in Dallas. I stayed there probably about 3 years as I was working on my master's degree in media studies, which was a, let's say, conceptual journalism type degree that looked at the discourse between brands and people, which teed up for me the perfect situation to begin to look at public relations as a career. I started out in television as a television writer and producer, but I did that to get experience while I was working on my master's degree. So my ultimate goal was never to be in television news. I'm so glad that I did it though. It taught me some very important things. Writing, number one, because writing for television news is a lot like writing for social media. It needs to be tight and concise, and you write to the pictures. Very, very important. Who knew that I would need that nowadays? Because social media was nothing to be heard of at that point. But after I got my master's degree, I started looking for my first PR position, and didn't quite happen. It's what I call the first recession of my life. Everyone was looking for jobs, but the economy wasn't the greatest. I ended up at JCPenney home office as a senior writer, creative writer in advertising. And that's really important too, even though I did it for a year. I learned the very importance of marketing and coming from a journalism background. It was a great segue to what I would do in public relations. Almost a year to the date that I was at JCPenney and recruited, at JCPenney, I was recruited by Fleischman Hillard. You're probably familiar with them as being one of the largest global agencies on the planet. I'm glad I got to cut my teeth there. And it's important to know that the family that recruited me there has very much to do with why I'm at AT&T today. But while I was there, I worked on the SBC account, which would become AT&T. I worked on Microsoft. I worked on AOL. So I got really deep into consumer technology, which would pave the way, I would say, for the rest of my career. Very important that while I was doing tech, it was consumer tech, because when the next recession happened, it would be very important that I would have those consumer chops, because as you know, right before 9/11, there was a tech bust right after the tech boom. And suddenly a lot of us that were in tech needed to work on consumer brands. So I ended up working at Fleischman Hillard for 3 to 4 years, something like that. Ended up at their sister firm, Ketchum, where I was a VP of media relations, and I helped launch the Singular brand. So you can kind of see this pathway
Right.
that's happening towards AT&T. Singular is actually our mobility business, which is our largest business here at AT&T. So the senior vice president that's here now, Larry Solomon, was my client twice at Fleischman and then at Ketchum. After my time at Ketchum, it's about the time the 9/11 happened, and I really started looking at life in a different way. I think 9/11 impacted a lot of people, and I decided that I wanted to freelance for a while just to see, how that would work. I got many of my first assignments and clients from Ketchum, and the interesting thing is that my contracts got large, so I needed to have help. And I got other consultants to help me. And as it would turn out, I decided, well, what if I did this as a business? So my freelancing ended up turning into what was called M Strategies, Inc. I did that for almost 10 years. During a heyday, I had about 7 full-time employees and about another 8 to 10 contractors across the country. I opened a satellite office in Atlanta to support my largest client at the time, was Church's Chicken. And then I opened a satellite office in Chicago to support our largest client at the time, Alberto Culver, which now is Unilever, and it was a bunch of hair care brands. So we did a lot of beauty and we did a lot of fast food. It was a lot of fun. It was trying, as any entrepreneur role would be. And I didn't have partners, so it was just me and my employees, and I had to make sure that that payroll happened every 2 weeks. The best experience I could ever have, because it gave me a view of the business, as well as public relations from different sectors and different capabilities that we had to engage. So from there, I guess about year 9, I started thinking, well, maybe it's important for me to go back into the agency business. I had a couple of accounts that I could probably take with me, and I did that, working at Golan Harris, which is an IPG firm. I did that for almost 2 years, about a year and a half, something like that. About 3 months in, I discovered I was pregnant with my little girl, Joni, who's 2 years old right now. And having a baby will also change your perspective. So I called myself going home to be with the baby. And I guess by the time she was 7 months old, I received a call from my very first boss at Fleischman Hillard. And he told me about a role at AT&T. And part of me was torn, because I thought, I'm supposed to be home with Joni. But as things would turn out, what he described really sounded like what I needed to be doing right now in my career. And he described exactly what you described in my bio. And here I am. So I took the position, and I've had a load of fun. It's been a learning experience, but I can say that this is exactly where I'm supposed to be at this point in my life.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what your day-to-day is like at AT&T, and how do you really feel like a lot of the work that you do impacts the lives of your consumers that you touch?
Yeah. I'm very fortunate to be in the reputation factory. That's what I like to call it in corporate communications. I reside under the umbrella, which we call citizenship and sustainability, which many companies would call CSR, corporate social responsibility. So we are the factory that generates good news. I'm glad about that. Of course, there are always issues out there that can impact the good news factory, but our job on a day-to-day basis is to tell the good news of the company. Diversity falls under CNS. And so I get to tell good stories that are not just targeted at those segments, but also to the general public about what the company does to support those communities, and also to support mobility and home solutions and even innovation, to tell the stories about the things that we're doing in the segments that will actually enhance people's lives. We have a wonderful global organization called GMO, which is Global Marketing Organization. Corporate communications funnels up to the Global Marketing Organization, and they have laid out a wonderful brand campaign called Mobilizing You. And I think that it really tells a story of the direction that the company is heading, and that is that we are enabling a mobile lifestyle for everyone in every aspect of what they do. So from day to day, what does it look like? That was the second question. I come in, and first, I think it's important to understand where I fall within corporate communications. Of course, I'm reputation, but I'm on a strategy team. There are those of us that create content, and we call that the farm. And then there's the factory, and those are the people on the services team. So there are teams around me that actually execute against the strategy. So in addition to my core team, which primarily is consists of agency people, we interface with media teams. There's the national media team, and there's the regional media team, and then we have a social media team, and then we have a blogger team. and all in all, once you add everyone together, you're going to have probably about 300 to 400 people on the ground, not just here in Dallas, but across the country. And I joked that going from a small agency where we had fewer resources to a Fortune 11 company, having to drive strategy at my small agency, just like I have to do here. It's like sitting behind the wheel of a Ferrari, because suddenly you have all of these resources, and you have to figure out how to deal with it and manage it, and also get it to do what you need it to do. So it's very fortunate to be in the strategy position. So there may be programs that come to me across the business unit that need my support. We'll support those. We'll also generate insights-driven campaigns from my shop that would actually support the businesses as well. So there'll be times where we'll enterprise an idea, we'll come up with insights from research, and we'll present a concept to, say, diversity marketing, which is a part of mobility, which used to be singular, to actually get a message out to a segment, and they may buy into it and they'll fund it. A great example of something like that would be Inspired Mobility, which we mentioned just a bit ago, targeted at the African American community. And the insight is that the church was and is the original social network for the African American community. And what we found is that people are using AT&T and other communications companies' devices and services to connect with their faith. So whether or not they're actually in church right now or even consider themselves religious, we have found that people are using mobile technology to connect with their faith and their inspiration. So that's the basis of it. And diversity marketing thought it was brilliant. They funded it. We actually launched last year at Blogging While Brown last year in June in New York. And the second phase will roll out at Blogging While Brown this year as well. There are other instances where a business unit may already have a concept and they need our support. A great example of that is in the LGBT segment, where we launched Live Proud, which featured Adam Lambert. And it was a social campaign that supported the Trevor Project, which is an organization that is a lifeline for people who are LGBT and looking for sanctuary, someone to talk to. That money went to support their hotline and any of their social services or social media services that would allow people in the LGBT community to connect to that sanctuary. for every share, tweet, I think it was a social retweet, share, repost of the videos that they posted, AT&T would donate $1 to the cause. And it was our job to actually promote it. At the end of that year, after rolling out that campaign and 2 other successful ones, and also speaking up in the Sochi Olympics, right before the Sochi Olympics, where we had the Russian government coming out with their anti-gay stances, we actually took a stand in a key moment in time that helped us to generate 800 million impressions almost in the course of 48 hours with no organic outreach, simply because the company decided to take a stand. So those are just a couple of programs that kind of gives you an idea of what I do from day to day. And then there are those fires that pop up. So there's some issues management that happens from day to day. I also get called on for counsel. You know, that's a sweeping group of segments that you just named. So from day to day, anyone might call on me and say, hey, Michelle, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? And I'll tap into my team as well. And we tap into our mind share and come back with a recommendation.
What type of research do you use to really understand the lifestyles and the psychographics of those varied segments that you have to talk to for diversity?
Well, the good news is that I named one of our largest clients, and that's marketing, diversity marketing within mobility. And then we also have marketing, which is a part of mobility. It's not necessarily diversity, it's general market. They are able to do their own research. We also have a research team within corporate communications. And then on top of that, we use secondary research that we might pull from, say, like Nielsen, Pew, any of those reliable sources. And then on top of that, my team might go out and do its own research. For instance, Fleischman-Hillard has a very, very strong research department. And we call on them for programs like It Can Wait. I know you're familiar with the It Can Wait campaign, Don't Text and Drive. They're probably in their, don't quote me on this, 6th or 7th year of research-driven publicity. And each time they come back with insights that we didn't know before. This year, you'll hear something totally different than you did last year that builds on that story. But just like with Inspired Mobility, we tapped into Ebony Magazine for the first time around and decided Ebony Magazine is like that go-to source for a lot of African Americans. It's trusted, it's credible. Let's do the research with Ebony Magazine. And they actually filled their readership some of the questions about mobility and faith. The second round, we're going with Fleischman-Hillard to get some omnibus, if you will, research done to fuel the next phase of publicity research that you'll hear about starting in June.
Tell us a little bit more about the campaign that you won the Silver Anvil for and some of the outcomes of that campaign.
Okay, I mentioned briefly Live Proud and Adam Lambert. I'll back up a bit. We actually presented this at the international conference in DC last year. I'm very proud to stand alongside my agency team from Fleischman-Hillard in LA, the Outfront practice that worked hand in hand with me to support the Live Proud campaign. Live Proud was only a part of it, but I'll back up before then. We've been looking at the segment for a few years to understand if this was someplace we could go and actually market. And I say we, I'm talking about my business partners and the business unit, diversity marketing. And then they came to us once they developed the program and asked corporate communications to support it. Well, what they found was our NPS score, which is a net promoter score. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but it's a marketing term. That's a factor that actually shows whether people have the propensity or the desire to want to recommend the purchase of our products and services or actually buy themselves. And if they don't, they tell us why, whether it's about, network or if it was customer service or something that caused them to feel that way. Our NPS score was in the tank. It was a -2 at the time. Anything negative, you probably know, was not a good, not a good score. But we did focus groups, if you will, with the LGBT community and found that there was a real need to speak to them about the products and services. In parallel, we did an audit of what our policies were internally for LGBT people. And what people don't really realize about AT&T, even though they know historically this is Alexander Graham Bell's original company. I mean, it's old, right? So with that, people assume that we are stodgy and, you know, pretty backwards. I don't want to use the word backwards, but maybe conservative in the way we approach things. Not necessarily true. In 1975, we were one of the first to establish policy against anti-discrimination in the workplace for LGBT. 1975. And then a little bit later in the 80s, we're the first to establish same-sex partner benefits. So we have this track record, and there's a long list of these things we're doing internally that nobody knew about. So in our research, our findings were that what if we started to communicate these things that we do internally around workplace to the people externally? And then on top of that, mirror some of their values. So with that, the Live Proud campaign was actually born. We did so well with the Live Proud campaign. That same summer, we decided to do something with Lance Bass from NSYNC and Polly Perrette from CSI, who is an LGBT ally, we should say. She's not a member of the community. Of course, Lance is a member of the community, but he had crossover appeal because of NSYNC. They actually volunteered out of the kindness of their hearts because they supported Trevor. It's important to have your third party in place that you can actually do some cause marketing with. But they stepped up and said, we really want to do this. And again, it was a social sharing campaign. And it really was a good opportunity for us because Lance had just announced that he was getting engaged. You had the backdrop of DOMA being, voted down. Same-sex marriage was actually something that was being talked about, and state by state, you saw it being adopted. So the environment was right. And then you had someone like Polly Perrette, who wasn't a member of the community, but was definitely vocal in equality. So we had these two spokespeople, and they developed short films that would ultimately be a call to action for other people to video their short moment in time, if you will. It was, I'm trying to remember the name of it, but they were supposed to archive their special moments. And at the end, and this is still going to happen, they're going to be archived in the Smithsonian, which, excuse me, not the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress. So we'll have another opportunity to go back and do some publicity around that. That campaign did extraordinarily well. Between the two of them, I think they generated upwards of 250 million impressions apiece. Then about that time, the Sochi Olympics happened, and I already described what happened there. We actually went out with a statement on our blog in the AT&T newsroom that actually described how we did not agree with the Russian government, and we are a sponsor of Team USA. We also worked in tandem with the HRC, which is Human Rights Campaign. Always good to have your third parties, and working with external affairs is who we work with within our company to rally those relationships. We gave them the heads up that we'd be writing the blog, and they were so excited about it, and having gotten a perfect score on their citizen corporate equality index, I should say, for the last 11 years, got 100%. They were very happy to go out to the news, go out with the news to their constituents as well. When they did that, we got a lot of organic pickup around the world about what we were doing, and again, generated about 800 million impressions in less than 48 hours without us even picking the phone up and being proactive. With those three key events that happened, I think we revisited Live Proud again for LGBT History Month, which is in October. Those four campaigns working together, we submitted for the PRSA Silver Anvil and actually won based on that. So our NPS score went from a -2 to a +13 just within that year's time frame. So something to be very, very excited about, but also it's challenging because we're looking at how do you raise the bar. And one of the questions that we get all the time is, well, this is a key moment in time for this community. How do you sustain it? So right now we're telling workplace stories about acceptance in the workplace because it's so difficult and across not just our industry, but across the workplaces all over the world and even in the US. So we have that leadership stance and we're going to continue to tell our stories.
Tell us a little bit about how you face a variety of different challenges. Some may say, you know, AT&T is such a huge global giant communication or telecommunication giant, and you have plenty of resources, you get plenty of research, lots of customers. So of course you had those demographics, and of course you'd have, you know, access to understanding those lifestyles and psychographics of your audiences so that you can relate to them. What are some of the challenges that you face more than anything to really, really reach and dig deep and become a part of your audience's lives?
Well, I will say that being in the diversity space, and I think it's like this in many, many businesses, we don't have the biggest budget. If I were to go across business units, I could find people with much bigger budgets than I have. If you were to add up the amount of people that I have on my teams, and they're all agency folks, which also gives you an indication that I don't have full-time people inside. You know, we sometimes have to make lemonade out of lemons. Not to say that I don't want to mock anyone. I've run a small business before, so I know. And many of the agency teams that I work with are small businesses as well. So I have an appreciation for that. But there are ebbs and tides in everyone's business, whether you're a Fortune 11 or you're not even on a Fortune list. And we're going through a time now where we're doing a lot of shopping, you might have heard, you know, when it comes to pending DirecTV acquisition. We just bought Usacell in Mexico. There's some other things that we have just, you know, acquired. That means the budgets are tight. So we can't always go out with the big fancy campaigns. Sometimes you have to downsize to make the same point. So there are opportunities for us that we may end up passing up because of budget constraints. And I think that's the takeaway. Even though you're in a Fortune 11 company, you may have budget constraints. And we deal with those just like any other company.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. I just want to let everyone know, if you're not watching on YouTube and you're watching through the Google Hangout, you can send us questions. There's a Q&A window if you want to send any questions over to our guest speaker, specifically either about AT&T or about her and the work that she does, or anything related to diversity and PR related, and want to get her feedback. Feel free to send us in those questions into the chat box. I'll also peek over at the YouTube page just in case you posted any comments there, and we'll get those questions to her. Michelle, tell us about, is there any specific campaign other than the one you just mentioned for the LGBT community where you kind of, you weren't really sure if this is the right way to go? If you were doing something that was maybe sensitive to a specific audience, and maybe you hadn't really determined whether or not, they catch on to it. Have you had any moments like that?
Oh, absolutely. You're not really doing your job if you're not doing a little bit of experimenting. And sometimes you have your research and it may not take you all the way to the insight, but you have to rely on your gut a bit. We do a lot of that in our business. And one area that I can point to in particular has to do with military spouses. We looked at the trend of the military drawdown last year and recognized that hiring stories had pretty much peaked, and you saw companies that weren't necessarily at the forefront of hiring veterans and making big announcements about how many they were doing. So while we wanted to continue to highlight those areas of hiring, and it's very important to make sure that veterans and their families have jobs to come home to, we wanted to speak to their most immediate need. And it seemed like that need was actually being addressed by a lot of different companies, and we would continue our commitment to it. But at the same time, we also saw that there were military spouses that were either at home while people were still deployed, or maybe the veterans were back and still looking for looking for jobs. But that military spouse, which is about 90% female, there are some military dads out there that are spouses as well that are holding down the home front. But they were really the backbone of that family. And if that military spouse didn't have a position, or if their job needed to move them around and they couldn't necessarily move, then that is a real issue that need to be addressed. So last year we took the chance to speak to the military spouse, and we looked for military bloggers, military spouse bloggers, and we engaged them. We didn't know if it was going to generate a lot of positive feedback, but it actually did. We seeded some military spouse bloggers. We hadn't done that in the space before, but they really did take an affinity to it, just about 10 of them. And we told stories between the beginning of May all the way up to Military Spouse Appreciation Day, which that year was on the 10th, this year it's on the 9th. But we really did generate some positive feedback. One thing that we've noticed in these diverse segments is that social media is so important in, I would say, leveling the playing field when it comes to engagement and impressions. Because let's say if you go after one segment, even if it's the Asian segment, they have plenty of outlets out there across Korean, Filipino, Asian Indian, you name it, Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, all of those. But at the end of the day, if you take USA Today coverage and you take New York Times coverage and compare it to all of those all of those publications I just named in the Asian segment on any good day, you will probably still see the impressions outweigh you on the general market side. So in order to shine in a lot of ways and to cut through a lot of the noise that's out there and actually be heard, social media is so important to us, because if we get one Asian YouTuber that has a great following to carry our message, we can get as many impressions and views and engagement as we might want to and online, and compare it to a general market outreach, and suddenly we're in the game. So for the military spouse outreach, if we had just gone to the military spouse trades and the military trades, we probably wouldn't have gotten that much of a rumble. But what we did was we got these military spouses to actually carry the message for us on their social channels. So, and what about hitting the target? I mean, that's hitting the target on its head, because they're the influencers in their groups and they're going to reach out to other military spouses. So when we do our reporting, we're able to say not only were we able to generate so many impressions, but we hit the target on the head.
That's awesome.
Congrats. I want to let everybody know I'm on Twitter and I'm trying to keep up, so bear with me.
Yes, definitely tweet us with the hashtag. If you have any questions, please send them via Twitter as well. The hashtag PR Diversity. And Michelle, your Twitter is LMichellePR?
That's right.
LMichellePR. Feel free to tweet our chapter as well, PRSA Nashville on Twitter, PRSA Nashville on Twitter. Feel free to tweet us, and definitely use that hashtag PR Diversity. And I'll be checking for any questions that we might have. And you can also send in any questions. We have a couple more minutes. We can send out any questions to the Google Hangout here with the question box, Q&A box. And you can also comment on the YouTube page for all of our YouTube viewers. Michelle, talk to us a little bit about what you've seen just overall from a diversity communication standpoint, when you think about it as a practice. Speak a little bit more specifically. I know you talked about the challenges as it relates to what you may face internally within your organization, but what do you think are some of the challenges overall for PR practitioners just trying to connect with audiences?
Well, I see diversity communications like I do any classic marketing exercise in PR or any segment or any practice, social media. You need to know your audience and understand what pushes their buttons, what are their passion points, what do they connect with. I see diversity communications as not much different than general market marketing, because at some point there are some distinguishing characteristics about your audience that will set them apart and generally cause them to connect with a message. And it's our job as communicators to figure out what that is. So, you know, when I first started, someone said, how are you going to do Hispanic comms and you don't speak Spanish? Well, here's part of it. I'm not Hispanic either, but I actually do have teams that speak Spanish, but that's not the only way. And I would say in this environment with the census reading the way it is with millennials, it's not the only way to connect. And I think that you'll be losing if it's the only way you're trying to connect through translations. This millennial group that's out there now, we call them ambicultural. And that means that they are as much American and United States oriented as they are their homeland when it comes to being Hispanic, whether that means you're from Chile or you're from Mexico or you're from wherever. They're very much attached to their heritage, but they're very much Americanized. And most of them do not speak pure Spanish if they speak it at all. So just like I'm not a member of the community with LGBT, but I have people that are working with me that are. And when it comes down to understanding the segment, research and insights are really going to help you to speak to these communities. So, you know, even if it is that you're trying to reach the general market, you know, sweet spot for device users, you have to figure out who those people are and push their passion points. So the bottom line to it is, if you understand classic marketing, you can do diversity PR, but you also need to understand that you need to dial up the cultural nuances and really dig into the segments to understand them and figure out which channels, which media mix make the most sense and what messages will resonate. And then also understand the issues in the current environment.
That's great feedback. And I think that many times as communicators, we realize that, you know, finding our target audience and really understanding that target audience, almost kind of living and breathing it for that moment, is very, very helpful, at least until we can try to understand it enough to communicate, you know, appropriately in ways that'll really penetrate them. How do you see making the case for diversity an issue for some public relations practitioners? I know that, you know, as AT&T, you probably don't have to make as much of a case, but then again, if you do, please share with us. But oftentimes as PR practitioners, we know that we have, you know, a broad audience to reach out to, and that our audiences are very complex, and we have to meet their needs for different reasons, and we can't, you know, give them a blanket message. We have to really, really target them. So how do we go about kind of making that case for diversity? And then also, when we make that case, how do we, you know, I guess, add some type of element for senior management or, you know, executives within the company or within our organizations who truly, truly are the decision makers? How do we add an element of a business driver for them to really see the value in using diversity as a priority?
That's a really great question. And I go back to my time running my own agency and understanding the way business works. The headline is that you need to make a business case. The subhead is that we make that case every day because budgets ebb and tide. We have to make the case every day. There are some business cases that are very much a part of the operations, things that make sense for the business bottom line. I give you a great example. Right now, Hispanic means a lot to the AT&T business. It should mean a lot to a lot of businesses if they're just looking at the census data. But if you dig deeper, you need to understand which audiences are key to your business and actually driving the bottom line. So I would say that the lead on this press release, since we've got the headline and we've got the subhead, is metrics. You need to make sure that you are able to quantify why this segment or that segment. And it may not be all the segments. It's going to be key to your individual business. AT&T, we're in a business where it's communications, it's broad sweeping. generally everybody uses services like ours, but we find that there are certain nuances within each of the cultures of the emerging segments, certain hot buttons that actually cause them to buy or not buy, or recommend or not recommend. And there are things that we can actually do to trigger that market. I think that if you aren't doing diversity public relations, I think that you need to find out why first. And then if you really believe that there's a case, you need to do your research, find out what the true business reasons are for doing it for your particular business, and then make your case with metrics. And I said that we make our case every day with metrics. Yeah, we're gathering impressions, we're gathering tone, we're gathering share of voice, we're gathering, I mean, all of those measures that you're probably familiar with, we're reporting every day, sometimes every week. And ultimately, at the end of the year, we need to be able to say, this is a reason to continue. And coming from the agency side, that's the way we made our money. That's the way we ate, right? If you take that mindset in the corporate communications, it's going to be a winner for you. So always think that you're winning the business every day.
Okay, awesome. I was checking to see if we had any questions. I don't see any right now at the moment. We've got a pretty good number of viewers at the moment, though.
Good.
So you all feel free to send in your questions. You can send them via Twitter through the hashtag PR Diversity. You can tweet them directly to, actually, you can just use the hashtag. You don't have to tweet them directly to anyone, but you can also tweet Michelle if you like. She's at LMichellePR. And you can also tweet the chapter. We're at PRSA Nashville. I
just got a question too.
Did you just get a question?
I have a question tweeted to me from Kristen Carver. And the question is, how did you go about seeding these bloggers? Blogger relationships are so tough to build. And you're right, Kristen, they're very hard to build. One way that we seeded the bloggers, first of all, we had to do our homework and find out who they were, and then understand who had the largest influence. And when you're looking at a segmented audience like the military spouse bloggers, you're going to realize that they're not going to have the same reach as maybe, you know, a lifestyle blogger that tweets about celebs and such. The important thing was to understand what their needs were. And one of the things that we were able to do, which was important to any military spouse, you know, they need to stay connected with their family and friends, whether they're deployed or not. So we actually gave them a device. We were able to give them a device. We were able to give them some branded gear, something that was specifically for them. You know, they were mostly female. So instead of just a branded AT&T cap, it was pink, you know, and it looked girly, you know, those types of things. They had not been seeded before. And I think that's important to note, because once you seed them and they've had that experience of receiving services, products, or even receiving monetary gifts, I hate to say it, but sometimes they become a little jaded. And the next time you come, they probably want a little bit more. So what we like to do is, in the beginning, if we can, start a relationship without, you know, a lot of monetary gifts and such, to see their willingness. And then ultimately we start to stair step. I have to work very closely with the national blogger team, because they have a sweeping list of bloggers that they work with on a day-to-day basis. And many of them are paid. And so if my team approaches one that's actually in the African-American segment, but say worked with the national blogger team on It Can Wait, and they already have an idea of how they should be compensated, I have to keep that dialogue open between myself and the national blogger team, so that when we approach them, we don't come to them with what they think is beans, you know, or if they'll feel like, you know, we don't appreciate their credibility. So it's a gentle dance, and sometimes it's difficult because they only communicate through email. And sometimes it's difficult to even get them to answer, but you have to just keep trying. So Kristen, I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Kristen. I appreciate you for giving Michelle a question. Continue. We have about 15 more minutes, so we can accept any more questions that you all want to send. Again, the hashtag is PR Diversity, and you can tweet them directly to the chapter, PRSA Nashville, or you can tweet them directly to our guest, L. Michelle PR. I had a thought. Speak a little bit about social media. There's a lot of data out there about how different demographics are using social media to find information, or to shop, or to even share with other members of their community and their culture. Speak to how social media integrates into your whole strategy, and maybe a variety of different strategies.
Very important to our strategy, for sure. As I mentioned before, social media to us is the ultimate leveling of the playing field, if you will, when it comes to voice. And you'll see that there are a lot of historically disenfranchised groups that have gravitated to social media to get their message across. Without bringing up a lot of what's going on in the news currently, you'll see that historically over the last maybe 3 years in the African American community, that Twitter has become a huge voice and a huge platform for the African American community. You may have heard of something that we have heard been coined Black Twitter. And some people have questions about what is it, because they think it's a place that you can go and actually put in a URL and find Black Twitter. But ultimately, it's the use of hashtags. And it's a viral use of hashtags with very cutting and biting commentary in 140 characters, or even it's witty in some cases. But we've seen Black Twitter cause social change, and it's also spurred national media. In the Asian community, YouTube is very, very important. And the reason is that so many of them have wanted to break into Hollywood, and Hollywood to them has been very narrow in casting Asian people. And so YouTube is an outlet for them to show their creativity and actually gain audiences of millions and millions. There is a man named David Choi who actually has worked with AT&T in the past for It Can Wait, and he is a musician. And David does a lot of covers, but he also does his own original music. But David has tons and tons of followers on YouTube, and he's also connected to other YouTube influencers of the Asian persuasion. So what we did with him was we asked him to write a song for It Can Wait, and we wanted something that could be played on the radio if people liked it enough. Didn't sound like a jingle per se, and it didn't even have to say It Can Wait, but it needed to carry the message. We actually compensated him for that, and he wrote a song, and within a day he had 60,000 views because of his influence. Right. LGBT community has used social media to get their point across too. You'll see that the HRC and some of the other large LGBT third-party groups have leveraged social media to get political change. You cannot take social media out of the mix when it comes to social change in LGBT. Hispanic population, whether it's Latism or Hispanicize or any of the groups, even LULAC, they have leveraged social media for social change. They're the largest group on Facebook that is ethnic. And that's partly because it was one of the first languages that you could translate into or actually use Facebook in Spanish. So you have large populations of Spanish people on Facebook. I could go on and on about who's using what primarily, but you get the point.
Got it. Thank you. That was great. And I mean, that alone is a case study in itself.
It is.
So look at
one of the things is it feeds into mobility. You can't really talk about social media without talking about these devices. And this is one of the reasons why the digital divide has been bridged with cultural groups. There was a time when they talked about the digital divide, and that meant that people didn't have access to computers that would allow them to access the internet to say, you know, send a resume somewhere and get a job. Well, when this device came along, it bridged the divide, because no longer did you need to own a PC, own a Mac, own any of that. You could get a device, you could log onto the internet, and you were there. So one of the driving factors to why I say Black Twitter is huge, mobility is one of the #1 ways the African American community logs on into the internet. So this also speaks to the second largest affinity to Instagram. African Americans are on Twitter, and they log onto Twitter primarily on their device. Instagram is a device only, at least it started out that way, a device only platform. So if you're going to take a picture on Instagram and upload it, you need to do it with your device. There's an affinity there. Digital video, when it comes to the Hispanic population, is huge. That's the way they consume a lot of their information. So if you want to communicate very impactful way to the Hispanic audience, one way we found is to leverage a Hispanic influencer and load some digital video of some cultural nuanced content and watch it go. So yeah, lots of insights there. And the Asian community, if they're viewing digital video, it's on a device. They're using FaceTime, they're using Skype, they're doing whatever to stay in contact with family around the corner and around the globe. So social media and devices are key to diversity.
Wow, that's great to know. As I said, I mean, you can't have the conversation about diversity with thinking about how technology plays into it, specifically with social media and technology, because so many different groups and so many different for different lifestyle reasons use those things that we need and we have access to, and whether it's to relate or to find information. So you're right about that. Do we have any other questions out there? Any more questions? We have a couple more minutes before we finish. Just wanted to check if we had any more questions. I wanted to ask, how do you see diversity evolving, or just the thought and the practice of diversity as a public relations practitioner? How have you seen that evolve over the years, and not just with your AT&T experience?
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen those approaches evolve?
The emergence of the blogger and the power of the blogger and influence of the blogger is going to continue. Just in watching, and I'm going to name a couple that I watched from inception. Afrobella, her name is Patrice. She started in 2006, one of the first beauty bloggers out there. She's now up for Essence a Best of Beauty award right now, but that's because if you're doing any type of event worth its salt, you've invited Afrobella. She's written for Vogue Italia. She's written for many of the African American national publications, and she's also written for a lot of the well-known beauty publications. Lovey, and I know you're probably familiar with Lovey. Lovey is also out of Chicago, but Lovey is one of those voices that you cannot skip over, and she is one of the main drivers of Black Twitter. You'll find that many of the voices on Twitter are bloggers, but some of them are just organically micro bloggers. And these people have become, I wouldn't want to say famous, but it's almost internet famous when it comes to influence. Across these segments, you're going to see where blogging and social media very much play into the role of the influencer and how they actually became influential. The internet's not going anywhere. We're seeing checks and balances. In fact, I've seen over the last year so many of the national stories that we're seeing fueled by the internet. In other words, there are things that maybe we weren't aware of before that the internet just blew the cover off of, because suddenly consumers can share information. They don't have to wait on CNN. They don't have to wait on some of the other big media outlets. In fact, the media outlets find it necessary to be on the feeds, the social feeds, in order to get that across. As it pertains to diversity, that's one thing with influence and voice. But I'd also say keep an eye out on that census. When you see SNL doing skits about 2050 and how the landscape is going to change, you can bank on it. And the fact is, there was a browning of America on the cultural side. And so marketers need to be aware of that and understand how to speak to this changing demographic. It's going to look different. And so I think that diversity marketing, if companies are doing it correctly, will become the general marketing, because the general market is going to be diverse. So our jobs aren't going away. In fact, they should be increasing.
That's good to know. That one note about our jobs, specifically for those of us who have an interest in diversity communications, aren't going away and that they should be increasing. And that's a good way for us to kind of summarize our call, or kind of bring in that last question about those of us who have a passion for diversity and communicating to diverse audiences, helping our companies, our clients, etc., know how to speak to different audiences. What do you say for PR practitioners who really want to move into that space a little bit more, have a passion for speaking to audiences from the platform of diversity?
Seek out companies that walk the talk. I'm very, very fortunate that AT&T actually believes in it so much that they're doing things internally that allow me to feel confident in going out with the message. But then also be aware that, like with marketing, sometimes the budgets aren't going to be as huge, in different companies. So there may be a time where your passion is going to outweigh your paycheck. It just happens that way. In fact, when I was running my agency, I had to make a decisive point about how I would approach it. People assumed because I was African American and I ran the agency that we were a diversity agency, and the opposite was the truth. We were a full service agency, although diversity was definitely a capability. And we made that decision because diversity budgets can be small. And if we wanted to participate and be competitive, it made sense for us at that point in time, small agency as we were, to try to become agency of record and do all of it. Corporate communications, blogger relations, any of those things, consumer outreach, whatever it might have been. But at the same time, we did seek out companies that had diversity as a part of their general market, if you will, or their key audience. Church's Chicken was a great example of that. We were agency of record for them for 5 years. But if you look at their segment breakdown, there were white Americans. We also had African Americans. And then we had this generation that would become millennials, be known as millennials, that cut across all of it. So you had some Asian, you had some African American, you had Hispanic. It turns out that, and I didn't realize this until I was in the chicken business, go figure that out, but fried chicken is one of those foods that translates around the world. You will find fried chicken on the menu of just about every culture, it spoke to me. Many of the franchisees during that time were from the Middle East. So there was a lot of cultural things going on there, and we were able to actually exercise our chops. Alberto Culver at the time had a portfolio of what they would call African American products, but over time they wanted to speak to people with textured hair or hair that had a curly pattern. What does that mean? And that was really interesting and an insight that was probably before their time. But looking at the census information, they saw that browning of America too, and along with the browning came the curling of the hair. So you're talking to people who aren't necessarily African American, but people who have curly hair that might want to straighten it, might want to maintain their curls. So we were able to use our agency of record, denotation, if you will, and actually infuse a lot of diversity thinking in what we were doing. So there may be opportunities out there that aren't necessarily diversity driven, that have diversity elements. And I would say start there if you can't find a company like AT&T to work for.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. I think we've run out of time, and I think you got a couple of people tweeting you. I was checking the mentions and the hashtags. Any last words before we end our call or our chat?
Well, I'd like to thank you, Ariel, first of all, for your leadership in pulling this together. Thanks to everyone that I didn't talk to. I mean, the last time we had the technical difficulty, but I actually got to talk to people. But thank you for joining. And if you'd like to tweet me throughout the day, as I have time, I'll respond. And I hope to connect with you guys soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle from AT&T, for joining us. We have our next diversity chat coming up in July. We have Matthias Cavalian. Let me get his name correct. He will be joining us. And I don't know if I pronounced it correctly, but he'll correct me if I was wrong. But he is the Vice President of Multicultural Engagement with the Zeno Group in LA and agency that handles multicultural and social media efforts for Kia Motors. So he's confirmed as our July guest speaker, and we look forward to our next diversity chat presented by PRSA Nashville. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.